Hello scholars and viewers. Today we are looking at the application of philosophies of science in research. And you may be wondering, why should we be talking about philosophy when we are not scholars of philosophy? The simple answer is that every person is born a philosopher. Why am I saying so? Because philosophy is made up of two Greek words, philo and sophia. Philo means love and sophia means wisdom. So I do not think there's any person, including the newly born child, who doesn't need to be associated or endowed with the love of wisdom. Every child, every person is born with an ability to be wise. It is the environments and the interactions that tend to obliterate this gift. So we want to learn that the profundity of scientific research initially depends on articulation of onto-epistemic processes than the methodologic processes. And there are scholars who have actually mentioned that the questions of methodologies and methods are secondary to the questions of philosophies, because philosophies form the bedrock or the foundation upon which sound methodologies can be established. There's one professor on LinkedIn, Professor Leonard, is actually saying that a paradigm or philosophy of science is like an operating system. If you have your desktop, your monitor and all the cablings, yet without an operating system, it will not work. It will appear like the set is complete, but the operating system is not there. It can't boot. If your laptop can't boot if there is no operating system. So philosophy of science or a paradigm is critical in your research, whether at master's level or even PhD level, let alone PhD level. But as far as I'm concerned, I also demand it to some minimal extent, even at undergraduate, because it's a foundation of doing this research. So you would want to learn that scientific research that is framed within specific paradigms tend to contribute more than those that are just plain. I remember one scholar mentioning that, doing a research without paradigmatic orientation, it's like a child without nappies. And that's very true. It's a very good metaphorical expression. It's like your study is not dressed up. So today I would love to share with you a few points and perspectives on philosophy of science so that we get to understand just how we can apply philosophy of science to advanced scientific research. So there have been a number of paradigmatic wars and confrontations for those who are in the natural sciences and those who are in the social sciences or education to say, no, our ways of doing research is more superior than the other. But that's not true, because each paradigmatic framework, each research approach is good at addressing different research problems. So there's not one which is more glorified than the other, although these psychological wars around paradigms have been going on for over half a century now. So it's very important for us to realize how can we use these philosophical, ontological, epistemological, axiological assumptions to inform our methodological decisions. So basically we'll be discussing this in series, and I will not offload all the information at once, but I should be able to offload in sections so that you have a very clear understanding of why philosophy of science and research. So when you're talking about philosophy, you need to be led to three variables. There's the philosophy of the paradigm itself, and when you're articulating it in your research context, you need to present the ontological assumptions of that paradigm, the epistemological assumption of that paradigm, and the axiological assumptions of that paradigm you have adopted. So three variables or entities are at play in order for a paradigm to be complete. So it's very important that we take this into consideration when we are trying to use the philosophy of science. Do not merely rush into ontology and epistemology. I think this is one of the weaknesses that I've noticed in candidates when they are presenting their papers. They would say, oh, the philosophy of study, or say paradigm, they would go like, the ontology of this is A, B, C, D, the epistemology of this, but which philosophical framework or paradigmatic framework are you specifically linking the ontological assumption and epistemological assumptions to? So it's very important to understand that you have to start with stating what the paradigm is, and then you state what the ontology, epistemology, and axiology of that paradigm is. And from there, then you continue with your journey till the time you reach the point of making decisions around methodology. So as I earlier mentioned, the word philosophy is not an abstract, obscure concept or exclusive to those who are doing philosophy, because when you're doing research, the highest level of thinking, especially at PhD level, is at wisdom. What's the wisdom in my study? You start with your data, the information, the knowledge, and then you go to the highest level of what's the wisdom inside what I am doing. And surely we can't separate love of wisdom from generation of new scientific knowledge, because whoever explores an idea or a problem and find new insights and contribute new scientific knowledge insights, that person should be classified as wise and generically a philosopher. I already mentioned that there are actually three prongs that characterize a philosophy or paradigm. The first one is ontology. Now, what is ontology? Ontology is the philosophical explanation about understandings of reality, or how reality or the world is viewed in each field of study. So it's a study of reality. How are we perceiving reality out there? It comes from the word ontos, which is the Greek word for being, or logos, which, as earlier mentioned, is the Greek word for study. So when you say ontology, you're talking about the study of being, reality. So what reality are we expecting from your study? So when you talk about this ontology thing, it should not intimidate you. We are just talking about how do we, the study of the reality that is expected from your study. Are you going to deal with subjective reality or objective reality? Is it a reality that is not socially constructed? Is it a reality that is separate from your opinion? For example, I have a bottle of water here, there is water here. I cannot say there is 10% of calcium in this water, or there is 200 grams of sediment. I can't say that because I have not gone to the laboratory to determine just how much calcium, just how much total dissolved solids can be found here. So my opinion cannot really influence the reality behind the physiochemical properties that are inside this liquid here. You see that? That is a reality that is independent of my opinion until I have gone to the laboratory to follow all the laboratory protocols to be able to determine just how much calcium is there, how much dissolved solid can we find here, how much sulfates, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, you may have another dimension. This water looks like transparent, but if this water becomes turbid, if we are to put, let's say, sediment particles, it will become brownish. When that is the case, then you may look at it from two contexts. Independent reality, that is the reality that is existing independent of the opinion of the observer. But there will also be a reality that may emerge as a result of the opinion of the observer. So in this case, if this water was brownish and someone asks a question, is this water clean? I'm able to say, well, it is dirty based on my observation, because I'm able to see the murky hue in the water, or the brown color. So I'm able to say, I know it looks dirty. I will use the common word dirty, but we technically call it, the water is turbid, so we can't use it for human consumption. You have provided your own subjective understanding of the reality behind this fluid. But in this current state, what was up to this point, the first opinion that comes perhaps is that the water is clean. But there are times when you may say this water is clean, and yet there are chemicals, though it looks transparent, but there are chemicals inside that makes it unfit. So if you want to understand water from that point of view, the quality of water from that point of view, you need to look at both sides of reality. Is it independent of the opinion of the participant or the user, or it is dependent upon his or her social construction of what they have observed? So this tends to influence the way we create the reality in a study. And if that is the case, that means even your methodology, the way you're going to structure your methodology, should be different. If you are going to view reality as independent of you, it means the methodology you're going to use are those which are free from your human opinion, from my human opinion and the opinion of those who will be participating in the research process. But if it happens that what you'll be studying requires people's opinion, then that cannot be an independent reality. The ontology behind that would be actually subjective, because the reality will be constructed based on the opinions, the feelings, experiences of those who are participating in the research process. So ontology is actually within two subdomains of ontological spectrum. So we have ontological spectrum, and there are two domains which actually are always at war, and this is what we call normalism and realism. What are we talking about? Under normalism, the reality of the world around us is based on inner subjective personal lens through which people view reality. This is the point that I was mentioning. So if you are viewing a reality from a subjective point of view, then you are on the extreme normalistic point of view of reality. But if you are saying reality must be independent of the observer, then you are on the realist, hardcore realist. But at the same time, there's this spectrum that I mentioned, the continuum. This spectrum, it reaches the midpoint. There's this side on the extreme, which is realism, and on the other side, normalism. But in between, we have the mixed ontology there, both subjective and independent, both dependent and independent realities, both objective and subjective realities can actually emerge out of that study. And that's what the reason why you talk about mixed methods designs, because the reality is not on either of the extremes, but it's in the intermediate. And in most cases, there are scholars who are now trying to champion the idea of mixing the methodologies so that we look at both sides and in a more balanced way, because either way, we cannot say it's balanced. Although some scholars, especially those who are on the realism dimension of ontology, they tend to brag about how solid their science is, but it's also subjective, because on the extreme side, those who are on the highly qualitative, subjective, they are also on the extreme. But there is need to start thinking balanced, mixed way and I think we can understand the reality in a more better way. So that is on normalism. So normalism, we are referring to name, nominal. So near normalism, so subjective. It is not objective. And then in other words, normalism postulates that there is no reality out there that is independent of what? The researcher and those participating in the research process. You will not separate the reality from the researcher and those who are being researched. They are part and parcel of the research process. But those who are in the natural sciences, physical sciences, they objectify their research. And at the end of the day, it's like what the object says is what it is, but it's not true. There are always these subjective layers that remain unperceived, and they need to be followed up to get to understand what is really defining the reality behind what we consider to be reality. But when you talk about realism, there is no such a thing as human opinion. I've already mentioned this. So it's very important that you take extra care when you are trying to venture upon research, because you need to understand what kind of reality do I expect, or how will the reality be understood or be viewed? Will it be viewed from the subjective or independent of the researcher and the subjects under research or who are participating? Or will it be considered as part and parcel, dependent upon? These questions must be answered before you proceed with doing your research. Lastly, as we are closing, because today I don't want to load you, we'll be going section by section. We are trying to articulate what ontology is. We have talked about a paradigm. We are talking about the philosophical framework that is guiding your research process and methodological decision-making process. And then we have talked about what really constitutes a paradigm or philosophy of science. 3 prongs. Number 1, ontology, and number 2, epistemology, and number 3, axiology. So we're trying to articulate what we mean by ontology, which we have talked about the study of the reality. What's the reality out there? What's the nature of reality that you're trying to study? What's the nature of reality behind the research problem that you want to study or understand through your research process? Now, ontology comes in different forms also. There are these sub-domains which I've talked about, the realism and normalism. And now we have types of ontology. You need to be aware of this. What type of ontology are you going to work with in your study? So there are 2 types. The first one is called the R ontology. R ontology. What do we mean by R ontology? R stands for referent or reality ontology. So if you see in the textbook, we see R ontology, we are referring to the R ontology. We're talking about the reality or referent ontology. And then there's also what we call elicited or epistemological ontology, which is abbreviated as E ontology. Both ontologies have their own ways in which they are used. So our ontology is a theory about how the whole universe is organized and corresponds to philosophers' point of view. That's our ontology. And it is mainly used as a lens when you're doing social science, educational research, and other human biased or human oriented kind of research. That's a reality or referent ontology. What about elicited or epistemological ontology? So epistemological ontology or E-ontology is defined as a theory about how a given individual, group, language, or physical science conceptualizes a given domain. So if you're doing your study from the human point of view, social science based, you need to articulate ontological perspectives or assumptions from the context of how those assumptions are informing the way you're going to frame your methodology. But when you're doing the physical science, these do not usually tend to be explicit. You are going to explain how a given individual, group, language, or physical science conceptualizes a given domain. So you find that there will be different styles and nuances and tastes that are going to come out because you are allowing the study, the findings, the key emerging messages to inform how the reality is going to be perceived. So you may develop a conceptual framework or a process model, and that process model you need to articulate what is the philosophy behind that is informing the general science within your broad discipline or your scientific landscape. That's very important. So in most cases, we tend to mix these. Our ontology is more user-friendly for studies that seem to be either mixed or more biased towards social sciences or education, but ontology is more useful when you're dealing with physical, natural sciences. That should be clearly articulated when you are using philosophy. Don't use them just open-ended or just as a blanket or encompassing concepts. You're going to mess up things. So you don't work with our ontology if you're dealing with social science, education, human engaged kind of studies. You need to work with reality ontology or referent ontology. But if you're dealing with physical science, the way the sciences bring out the philosophy to build up on the existing body of knowledge, that is the philosophy that we are talking about from the ontological point of view. So if you're doing GIS, physics, geography, geology, I mean, when I say geography, I mean physical science, physical geography, engineering, usually you work with epistemological ontology. And that's why for those who are only familiar with the our ontology, that's why you find they will ask questions, say, so what's a philosophy? But it has to take someone who understands. So there is a philosophy, even if it's not explicit, there's a philosophy behind this product that has come out of this physical science study. So ontological views actually influence epistemology and eventually methodological approaches and methods that one research is going to actually adopt. So you have to ensure that the methodology and methods are consistent with the ontological and epistemological assumptions. You can't talk about methodology. There are also people who go to the extreme to say, what is important is I have a formula, this technical formula, and I'm going to use it. This is the science I'm talking about. No, that very science behind it, there is what we call epistemological ontology, and you need to articulate that. So for today, I do not want to go beyond ontology. If you got a question, I would be very happy to engage with you. Don't forget, we were talking about the use of philosophy, introductory lecture number 1. Philosophy is philosophia, love of wisdom. There is no way you'll be a scientist eager to contribute new insights to the scientific landscape and then you are not wise. That in itself is wisdom, and therefore every person that is geared to contribute to scientific insights, that person is naturally or generically a philosopher. And we say that when you're talking about philosophy of science or paradigm, you need to state what the name of that paradigm is, and thereafter you articulate what the ontological assumptions of that paradigm are, what the epistemological assumptions of that philosophy are, what the axiological assumptions for that philosophy are. But merely mentioning these assumptions is not enough. We'll be looking at that later in the lecture, so you would want to be following this series until the last one. So to state the assumptions is not enough. You have to recontextualize them. So we have talked about ontology, the two subdomains, that is normalism and realism, and then we have talked about the two types of ontology, that is ara-ontology and e-ontology. Where are these used? The e-ontologies on the physical natural science and the ara-ontologies on the social science, education, or research that involves human perspectives or human beings. That's why I use the ara-ontology. So in the next series, I'm going to talk about the epistemology, because I left my last lecture on how ontology influences epistemology, and that's very true. If you view reality as independent of people, what epistemology should be there? Or if you view it as dependent on human reading or value reading or perspective or perceptional reading, what kind of epistemology do you need to use? So in the next series, I'll be explaining what epistemology is and axiology, and perhaps look at other aspects of methodology. So thank you very much for watching, and looking forward to engaging you again online. Thank you.